Welcome to this week's Leading with Purpose podcast. We've got a return guest here today, which is brilliant. Sean Duffy, CEO of the Wise Group. And what we really wanted to do was to get some of the insights from Sean and the Wise Group on the issue that we're all talking about, the issue that the Purpose Coalition is really focused on, which is how can we make sure people get connected up to opportunities? And we know from the work that Alan Milburn's been doing, his initial report that has come out on the million NEETs. This is a million young people not in education, employment, or training, that there are some really complex challenges around all of that. And Sean can talk a bit about what the Wise Group does, but essentially helping what for all of us are complicated lives get moving in the right direction is exactly what the Wise Group does. And I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Sean, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast. Maybe it's worth kicking off by just telling people a little bit about what the Wise Group does and some of the impact that you have. And then we'll dig into this question of participation and really why we want everyone to be part of our economy, part of our society.
Okay, thank you, Justine, and it's lovely to be here again. It's lovely to see you again. Yeah, I mean, the Wise Group is one of the UK's leading social enterprises through impact. It works across Scotland and the predominantly north east and northwest of England, and it tackles poverty and creates opportunities for people and communities. I think for more than 40 years, we've supported people facing some of the most complex and corrosive situations in society. Life's toughest challenges, whether that's unemployment, involvement in society or opportunity, justice system, poor health outcomes, and inequality. And what makes us different is our belief that change happens when people are supported. We have a very clear definition of our system in terms of relational mentoring, and what it does is about working alongside people, not doing things to them. And it'll be interesting when we come on to talk about the participation element later. Helping them navigate complex systems, because our systems that we have in the UK are complex, and when complexity of life meets complexity of systems, it's never a good outcome. And that helps us build confidence and create opportunities for them to change their lives. So every year we support tens of thousands of families and communities across the UK to do this. We've been doing, as I say, for 40 years. And our work is much more than delivering systems and delivering services. It's delivering insight and delivering evidence about what true vulnerability looks like, feels like, sounds like, tastes like, and smells like for government and legislators to make better decisions about the systems they design going forward.
And it's never been more important than now. And something that I know you're really passionate about and you talk about is this issue of what you call participation and the
Yeah.
future of work. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by all of that, how you see it, why you think it matters so much.
I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned the Alan Milburn report, and it really struck a chord with me. And again, it's something that I think most people will intuitively know, but we've never had laid out in such stark terms before.
I agree.
Participation is much more than employment. People participate through learning, volunteering, caring, parenting, and community life. Employment is only one expression of participation, as is skills. It's not its definition. I think it's really important because I think we may come on to talk about it. We still have a single issue policy system where the manifesting issue is the point of engagement. And the manifesting issue is almost certainly never the issue at play.
So what you mean is somebody might turn up in the NHS with a health problem, or there might be a housing issue, something like that.
Yes, and in that way, the National Health Service treats them, or the local housing infrastructure supports them, but that's not the issue that they face. Because when you go back to the job outcomes, when governments focus only on job outcomes, they tend to overcome the conditions that make work sustainable. Because stability comes before participation, and participation comes before productivity, and productivity before economic growth. And you can see the cycle. Our experience shows that when people have trusted relationships, stable lives, work becomes much more achievable. But we've spent the last few years asking ourselves, why are people not participating? Particularly through the Milburn report, the not in employment, education or training. And perhaps a better question is whether we've designed systems that make participation possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you and I, when we spoke recently, we talked about what is it that's challenging that participation. At the heart of it is declining trust.
Yeah.
declining trust from that group of people, the NEET group, that they trust that the systems that are presented to them are designed in a way that reflect this challenge that they're facing. When we were custodiating the other day, we talked about we have 20th century systems trying to solve 21st century problems. And that's exacerbating this participation issue.
And so part of it is just policy that deals with symptoms instead of looking behind that at some of these interconnected root causes. And I think also it's just a very backward looking way of organizing things, isn't it? To say, well, actually, it's a housing issue, so we're just going to fix that. Not looking at how come that person has presented in that way at that time, and if you like, what's behind it. And I think the point you're saying around moving from tackling symptoms to being able to tackle root causes, which then mean people genuinely have a sense of participating, I think is really powerful. I don't know what you think, but I wonder whether part of it is, to some extent, there's an intergenerational aspect of this, and maybe it's people haven't ever seen this work for their parents, so almost they've grown up not trusting a system. And that's another, as you say, part of the problem.
I think there's an element of truth in that. And also, what exactly, going back, there's a misconception that COVID caused this.
Mhm,
COVID didn't cause this. COVID exposed it. It was always there. And COVID's probably accelerated its impact. You know, there's undoubtedly been a collapse in transitions.
mhm,
And I know that we touched on it when we were recently together about that natural transition of school to further or higher education to stable employment to stable adulthood. That linear transitional route is no longer there. It's been interrupted. And what's also interrupting that is we've got the digital isolation that a group of our young people are facing, and also delayed independence.
mhm.
People are staying at home with their parents longer. Their ability to learn and adapt and engage with the next phase of their life is being delayed. And that's causing anxiety, it's causing lower resilience, it's causing lower developmental elements in that part of it. And this is all contributing to their inability to participate.
So almost all these wider life steps that would have just given you a sense of moving forward, even if getting work was hard, you might be thinking, "Oh, I could rent that flat or I could do this." The literally the whole piece of it is harder
Yes.
to shift on now. That's, I think, the point you're making.
Yes. And also, we go back to the system set up as it is, it anticipates and assumes that all of this is taken care of. You know, and it's really interesting. The risk that employers take on now,
Mhm,
that further and higher education establishments take on now, is much greater than it's ever been, because people come with complexity in their surrounding environment, either a level of instability or anxiety around about their home life, because their lives are interconnected. And one of the things that we've done over the last 18 to 24 months is invested significantly in creating an evidence base that shows what the interconnectedness of vulnerability looks like at a household level.
mhm.
We've used the Green Book methodology from the Treasury, we've used Jacob Symmetrica in terms of social economics to be able to demonstrate what that truly looks like, that interconnectedness, and actually how it deviates across different labour markets. So if the national government look at it and say, right, we'll do a single policy with a standard framework and eligibility criteria, and then it meets individual labour markets and individual complexity, and it fails.
Yeah. And do you think it's a bit of a misconception of policymakers, really, that one size fits all? And, I have to say, I certainly do. I always used to find it quite odd that people in Whitehall would expect one policy to work the same for everyone everywhere. I just thought you'd have to question why it did if it did. That would be odd if it did. But it just feels like there's this maybe lack of understanding of how to take a grip on that complexity and design policy for the real world.
Yeah, I think the phrase I would say is, people's lives don't take place through the lens of policy.
Mm.
People don't experience life in policy categories. You know, and I think I was reflecting with a colleague this morning about, as an aside, just about economic activity or inactivity and city deals in Scotland as an example. And someone I was speaking to recently talked about the success of city deals is measured by the number of cranes in the sky. And it made me reflect, when you're a family in a degree of vulnerability or instability, your ability to connect with the meaning of a crane in the sky as economic prosperity is nil. So how do you participate in that £5 billion being given to X city region for inward investment? And that's going to be a great news story for you, or you can look forward to a prosperous life. So that isn't relative in the way that we talk to people through the lens of policy. They can't connect their situation with what policy is saying it's going to do for them.
That's so interesting. And I think maybe it's a bit of a warning as well. As we record this, it looks like Andy Burnham will become the Prime Minister, in a couple of weeks. And actually, Burnham's talked about good growth in every postcode. And I think we'd all be for that, actually. But there's a risk, isn't there, that it ends up being the same, where, sure, there may be some parts of whatever the country is, Manchester, anywhere else, where you're seeing some investment. But if it's cranes and if it's things that actually don't touch the lives of people around those regeneration areas, then that's not the good growth, I think, that Burnham is really referring to.
I think you're absolutely right there. And it's interesting because I
It's
think
about
participation.
participation, basically. So good growth
Yeah,
is only enabled through participation and vice versa.
participation is a two-sided thing, as well as we've got to find a way of government participating positively in people's lives, not just people participating in the opportunities that government create.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there is a two-sided element of this. And that piece that you talk about there about the incoming Prime Minister is, if I talk about it in just labour market terms, each individual labour market is different. And it has different dynamics, different employment opportunities, it has different transport and infrastructure challenges. Therefore, the requirements of that labour market are different. So good growth in every postcode is not an equality question, it's an equity question. That's all about, do I understand that postcode? Do I understand the complexity in that environment, in that area? Do I understand the infrastructure? The work that we do is social infrastructure. Relational mentoring is social infrastructure. That's not cranes in the sky. That's people in houses. That's people with households and families, charting a trajectory with them to sustainability, understanding how you help them navigate complexity. That's what good growth looks like in each postcode.
And I think, the other piece of it for me, and we've talked about this in the past, is, often a treasury view of it will be how many people are unemployed. Right now, they'll be obsessed over how many people need. Fine, we just need to get that number down. But it comes back to this is a symptom point. And so just getting somebody into employment, training, whatever it is, isn't enough, is it? It's about their progression beyond there. And from a wise perspective and some of the experience you've had, what's it take to help people not only make the transition, but stick with it and make it a successful one?
I think the point you mentioned there is so important. Throughput is not transformation. And, we have as you'll recognise in the sectors that we respectively work in, the use of the word referral is quite interesting. The UK in general, Scotland in particular, suffers from referral fatigue. Households and families get referred to here, to there, to everywhere else because it's a single issue system. It's interesting. What does it take to keep people in work? Getting someone into work is only the beginning. It's the sustainment of that situation. So it's not about starting in employment, it's staying in employment. And what it takes to stay in employment is quite interesting, because it requires trusted relationships to see the situation that person has, that household has, to allow them to engage with employment in a meaningful way. Household stability, employer flexibility
Hmm.
also, right, alongside that, ongoing support and mentoring. Because again, I go back to that, there's been a collapse in transitions. Certainly, certainly from my age group, and I'm sure you'll recognise this too, there has been a complete breakdown in informal job entry. Paper rounds, milk rounds, the Saturday job. Your introduction to the workplace is no longer staggered and phased. It's quite pronounced. And, so that ongoing support and mentoring to help people establish themselves in a working environment and a working pattern is really important. And also rapid support when circumstances change.
Hmm.
We're
Hmm.
very, very slow to respond when circumstances change for people.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's interesting as well is, again, there's a part of the economy or part of society that's focused on all this a lot, which is universities.
Yes.
We've done 20 years plus of widening access to universities, but actually it's been more than that. It's widening access and participation. And we have widening access and participation plans, because what I think we realized was it's not enough to allow, say, young people from very modest working class backgrounds, first in family, to get to university. Actually, there's a process to make sure they can then make the most of that opportunity. And absolutely is about these different pieces of support. It's around, mentoring and I think we often lose sight of the fact that you've got people like the WISE group that know their insights around all of this, but there's also a whole sector out there of universities that can talk about what it takes to help people progress in education, and that is easily transferable learning for employees as well.
Yeah. And, the further and higher education space is really interesting and timely. We're doing some work with Glasgow Kelvin College at the moment. They've got a very forward-thinking principal, Joanna Campbell, there. And what we're doing there is we're working with their students that come from a high SIMD area, and we're not only supporting them, but they're supporting their families. And we've got experience there. So we support their families. It creates a better environment for the learner. And you get double benefit, because not only does the learner have a positive journey, but you create family stability alongside it. We ran a year or so back, and I did this in conjunction with Sandy Begbie of Scottish Financial Enterprise,
Oh, yeah.
and a No Limits Pathfinder, Tayside in North Lanarkshire, and we worked with Skill Development Scotland and the Campus Corps to identify kids who had the capability but didn't have the opportunity, had the capability but didn't have the stability potentially.
Hmm.
The kind of traditional, I know this is roughly accurate in terms of these figures. The traditional completion rate on foundation apprenticeships in Scotland for SDS was between 55 and 60%, roughly there or thereabouts. And that's with learners and households that are stable and able to connect and engage. We were working with households who were potentially unstable, and couldn't either see the connectivity or were unable to connect. And that Pathfinder achieved 89% retention rate.
Wow. So
And
it
that's
basically
with,
worked.
yes, and it works. Right? We actually got Apprentice of the Year in Dundee from that cohort. And I detest the word cohort, right? So it's people. We got the Apprentice of the Year. And what it shows us is that if you provide the environment and the conditions around about the household, you get the right outcomes. Now, that's broken generational underachievement or attainment.
Presumably also there's a sort of second order series of benefits that the wider family has that maybe are a bit harder to measure, but perhaps it's nudging them on the beginning of a similar
Yeah.
transition process.
Yeah, and what it did, what it was incredible to see was the reverse mentoring of the family
Hmm.
in that situation was remarkable.
Fantastic.
One of the things that we did
People you're
was
working with, they're then having their own conversations with their own families.
they're seeing their children have structure, approach, ambition, a journey. and they're beginning to align alongside that. I mean, one of the things that the team did, and this might sound innocuous to any of our listeners, but one of the things the team did was make sure everyone had an alarm clock. And it's just we take for granted sometimes that these things happen, but when you're in elements of instability in communities, these are not standard. And the real question isn't how quickly we get someone into work or education. For me, it's how we help them build a life that allows them to stay there. It's not getting them into it, it's allowing them to stay there and participate meaningfully and confidently.
And I think what it touches upon is, that requires a wraparound support for people. Some of what WISE has done has been around energy advice, digital inclusion, so much more, if you like, than just the mentoring piece.
Yes.
People getting to work. And I guess it's just good to get some of your learnings around how you blend those different programs together, what you feel works about it. Let's sort of develop that thinking around, the second order piece for families as well, which is brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, we work across justice, employability, fuel insecurity, education, housing, digital inclusion. But the lesson's remarkably consistent. And that's the thing about is actually it's not different in housing as it is in health, as it is in justice, as it is in education. It's remarkably different, right? Different services, same human needs. It's trust, consistency, relationships, practical support. When I mention mentoring and people kind of go, oh, I'm not quite sure what that is, it's a professional discipline that has a structured framework around about it that is designed to help people navigate complexity. It's a professionalised service. One of the ministers asked me the question about why does personal well-being matter so much? We were talking about how we measure someone's personal well-being's improved. She says, but yeah, what does that really mean? She says, well, actually, when your personal well-being is low, you disengage from life. You don't open your bills. You don't go to your doctor's appointment. You don't make sure the kids go to school so that there's higher levels of truancy. You don't engage with employment or education opportunities. That's what low personal well-being brings. So personal well-being is hugely important. And we're able to measure what person's personal well-being is. So it's not a soft element of this challenge that society faces. It's a real element. And that's why relational mentoring works. I suppose it works across different policy areas so well because not because the services are similar, it's because people's situations are similar, complexity is similar. When you see it, you recognise it. And we have the ability to bring current evidence into energy conversations, uncover debt, they uncover health, housing and family issues. Once you sit with a household, you see the multifactorial need of what their complexity is.
And I think on the back of that, well, so in a sense, you're talking about that social infrastructure that you provide for people, which is absolutely vital. But if you then put WISE together, for example, you talked about energy with the partnership that you've got with E.ON, who are also part of the Upscalation, you sort of start to see how this can work. You've
Yes.
got willing employers who can allow their bit of the jigsaw puzzle to stop being a problem and start become a solution, then you can start to see how this does get fixed.
Yes.
Actually, possibly with a WISE group, as it were, almost being the orchestrator, to get all those pieces sorted out. But yeah, the employees are out there, aren't they, Sean?
Yeah.
The organisations are out there that are willing to be part of a solution and work with you on that.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly refer to the work that we do as we quarterback people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way that we act as a social integrator within communities, because there is enough investment, and that's some slightly controversial for some, but I believe there's enough investment in the system at the moment that we should make work better. The argument continues to be about more and more money. If you look at E.ON and the work that we do with Kristen Aubrey and the team at E.ON has been fascinating in Glasgow, and that was about us bringing agency and trust to a situation where you had a local authority and a utility company who had a really good solution to try and alleviate some fuel poverty. And I was talking to Chris about actually you play a larger part in poverty overall. It's not just fuel poverty.
Mm.
And that was about getting batteries into
Exactly.
households that were under challenge, so that they could draw down power at the most cost effective tariff, and then draw from it during the day.
Mhm. Yeah.
And but also provide agency where they were able to do that, and that's been hugely successful. And you'll
And the
see
thing,
you'll see that launch elsewhere now.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about putting, in that case, literally putting power in people's hands
Yeah.
to manage their lives. It's about giving them some agency to think, well, I can decide.
Yes.
So, like, why not? And I'm confident to be able to do that. And it's just such a good example of how you can go beyond just having a problem to sort of seeing some solutions. Fixing why this family maybe uses so much energy, putting them in charge of how they can reduce it. And if you talk to people like Chris, you will say that can literally save you 300, £400 a year,
Yes.
which is a huge amount.
On average, and just on that monetary piece, on average, the work that we do with families has on average about a 12 to 1,300 pounds positive impact on their household income, and that's not increasing their income. That's actually just about stabilising the various elements of how they live, and what they do. And that's where I think government has a real opportunity, both local and national. Don't launch new programs. And I continually say that is focus on redesigning how our systems work together.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
and it's relatively, you know, it's not glamorous from a political perspective necessarily, but it's hugely impactful by getting this right. Where we see it working, and we're involved in a number of areas across Scotland where it's working, it's beginning to work now, you see the impact on citizens and communities and households. And surely that's the motivation for it.
And I think, you said earlier, it's not so much about resources. And I think there's something in that. I think we have a lot of the jigsaw pieces and we keep on tweaking them. And, each new government will want to say, these are our things that we have done. But in my experience, it's the same as yours, Sean. I mean, this is why I love doing all the purpose coalition work. And we love having Wise part of it. It's about how do you make those pieces fit together?
Yeah. I
Because,
mean,
like, from an Eon perspective, you're helping it manage its bad debt the right way, which is to actually get lives on track. And that's a win-win for everyone. So I just think if you can start to make the pieces fit, including the government pieces, that's the point you're making, then
that's
we can get transformed outcomes maybe faster than we realize.
yeah. You know, we got to start building around households, and that's the piece for policies. Build around households.
Your message build around
Yeah.
households.
Well, build around people love interconnected lives. I've said that, right, and our support should reflect that. I think also invest in relational infrastructure.
Hmm.
And I go back to that cost of detachment and participation, and the relational infrastructure brings that together. Relationships should not be viewed as an optional extra in the challenge that we face. They're actually these are what make interventions effective. The other thing as well is we need to start measuring stability.
Yeah.
Right? We don't measure
Putting a
stability.
value on.
We measure activity. We don't measure stability because the impact of instability
Mm.
is huge.
Yeah.
And if we measure sustained participation, aggression, and reduced repeat demand, we would begin to see what the true impact of the systems and policies we're designing are,
Yeah.
and use data as insight. I talk about the investment we've made, Justine, and the data approach and what we're able to understand now. And we've got millions of data points that are gathered both qualitatively and quantitatively through families and households undertaking self-assessments in a structured way. What creates stability? What prevents crisis? What enables progression? Where public investment achieves the greatest long-term value? Not just simply how much activity is taking place. And I say this to many people that we engage with is our data's there to work with people and talk to them about. Because what we need to do is we need to reward prevention. We don't reward prevention at the moment.
Totally.
In the public sector realm, we don't reward prevention. Procurement rewards outputs. It doesn't reward prevention. policy's not looking at prevention necessarily. It references it, but it's not necessarily looking at future commissioning needs to increasingly reward prevention and sustained outcomes and reduce demand on public services. It
Yeah.
doesn't do that at the moment.
I totally agree. And I think what's interesting is we take a fresh look at devolution, perhaps with a Burnham administration. There's surely a chance now to say, well, actually, for communities and for regions that have got lives off track, as Alan Milburn points out, that really weighs on public services that then mean they find it hard to cope, which means people get less support than they need. If you can start to pivot that, why shouldn't some of those savings be retained locally? Why not have some incentives at a local level to turn the ship around? And I think at the moment, if you're a brilliant council really getting lives on track, you get those second order economic benefits. But if there's welfare savings, well, they go to the DWP, up in the centre. And I just think the whole thing, if you could start to configure those incentives, as you say, the right way, then you get into a really interesting space around perhaps communities with more agency and trust to come up with their own solutions, working with partners on the ground, but actually knowing that if they can do that, then there's X, Y, and Z that they might be able to get on the back of it, to reinvest in themselves again. So it's a virtuous circle you start to create.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you take that through the lens of there's a lot of chat at the moment about social value, right? And there are varying degrees of efficacy around about some of those
Yeah, yeah.
conversations.
Totally.
But for me, it's actually about what public value do you generate through preventing crisis, reducing repeat demand, and helping public systems work more effectively together. If we look at our reward mechanisms in terms of how we're procuring services, how we're commissioning policy into execution, and what are we expecting from them, we'll start to see that come into the execution of it.
And the evidence-based approach you're talking about, where actually from a sort of individual perspective, we increasingly know what works.
Yes, we do.
There's no need to sort of have a stab in the dark at any of this for policymakers. And there is some complexity, but actually what it means is you just have to provide solutions that are tailored and closer to people. Well, again, we can do that. You can do that.
Yes, I believe we can.
So for you, Sean, as you look ahead, you know, potential new government coming in, set against the backdrop of a big challenge on NEETs, and as we've both talked about a lot, the transitions becoming harder for people. Do you feel like you've got a sense of optimism that we can kind of move this in the right direction maybe now? Rather
I
than
do. I do. I do. I mean, I think I'm the eternal optimist because I do. I genuinely do. I mean, there's some things that I continue to have an uneasy relationship with. The use of the phrase public sector reform is one where we need to define we need to define that more clearly in terms of what do we mean, because people use it interchangeably between efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah.
I think that's hugely important because for me, public sector reform isn't about creating more programs. It's about creating the conditions where people can participate, contribute, and thrive.
It's those jigsaw pieces, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's shifting them to work together.
And that ambition of growth in each postcode can be achieved. That's where reform executed correctly, using what's already there in a more interconnected way and rewarding prevention rather than outcomes. That's what I think reform would feel like truly if it were looked like through that. And I come back to that stark piece of insight that I got when I said, well, what does cranes in the sky look like to me when I can't pay my energy bill? Why should I be excited about that? In terms of economic development, people have got to see their participation in the narrative and policies of government. And equally, they've got to see the narratives and policy of government participate in their lives. And that's what I mean about that equal participation thing. It's a two-way piece here.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Well, we'll see which direction it goes in. But I think, the positives that come out of our discussion today are, first of all, the solutions are out there. That's what we've always thought. And secondly, I think, there are some willing participants in the wider society that want to be part of this too. And I certainly hope through all of your work the brilliant work the Wise Group does and all of the Purpose Coalition work, which is just really encouraging more and more employers to think where they can start to fit in with all of this. Bit by bit, we are assembling the solutions, and I think that's really exciting. Sean, I just want to say a massive thank you for coming on the podcast again. Genuinely insightful, brilliant discussion, and yeah, maybe look forward to doing a third one at some point in the coming months. We can find out and catch up and take stock of what actually happened, perhaps. But in the meantime, thanks for coming on, Sean Duffy, CEO of the Wise Group.
Thank you, Justine. It's a pleasure.